you see Bob Dylan, please tell him thanks a lot. We cannot move, our fingers are all in a knot. I don't have the strength to get up and take another shot. And my best friend John Ross won't even say what it is I've got. Hey, you're listening to Trigger Warnings. This is the Bob Dylan Rhetorical Analysis Power Hour.
Part two.
Part two, The Revenge of. Featuring myself, Chris Smith, and John Ross on the line.
Hello, Dylanistas.
Hello, bad hombre. How are you?
Hello, nasty woman. I'm fine. Does this make us Dylanistas?
Dylanistas? I didn't know Dylanista was a thing.
I think we just invented it. We are cutting edge.
Well, as you may know, last week here on Trigger Warnings Challenging Talk Radio, we devoted our entire program to the discussion of what we thought were going to be four Bob Dylan songs in rhetorical analysis. And we had so much fun, and you did too, that we only got to two of them. So this week we'll be talking more Dylan lyrics, plus a couple, people are still continuing to contextualize Bob Dylan.
Everybody but Bob Dylan is contextualizing Bob Dylan, as it turns out.
Yeah, Bob has remained silent, and then on his website appeared one sentence plugging his autobiography that said, "Hey, I won the Nobel Prize," or "Bob Dylan has won the Nobel Prize. Please buy his autobiography." And then the sentence disappeared the next day.
You know, I have to. I think Jimmy Kimmel did this week, and this ties directly to our conversation. Specifically, were you going to go to Albuquerque to see him? Did you go to Albuquerque?
I did not go to Albuquerque to see Bob Dylan.
Okay, so what's interesting is that Kimmel, on his Tuesday show, on his monologue Tuesday, reported that the Nobel Committee had said it was still trying to make contact with Bob Dylan, that it didn't know where Bob Dylan was, that it couldn't get through to him. And Jimmy Kimmel said, "Here's where he is. He's in Albuquerque, New Mexico. He's at a concert tonight. Why don't you buy a ticket and show up?" And how interesting that they can't find him. It's kind of like a Where's Waldo, or Where in the World is Carmen Sandiego, or Where in the World is Bob Dylan. But again, I'm imagining the exact 180-degree opposite from when James Cameron got up and accepted that Academy Award for that horrible Titanic movie and said, "I'm the king of the world." And Bob Dylan is the exact opposite. He could care less. Let them find me. If they can find me and send me a plane ticket, I'll show up in Stockholm on December 10th, maybe.
Yeah, I mean,
might he not show up at all? Could he send someone in loco parentis, or in loco artista, or whatever it's called when you send the pinch hitter for the winner?
Yeah, in reading some of the journalism about Bob Dylan's Nobel Prize in literature, some people said Thomas Pynchon should have won. And interestingly, Pynchon won I think it was the 1974 Book Award, some major award for Gravity's Rainbow, and in his stead, he sent a stand-up comedian to accept the award, and I wouldn't put it past Bob to pull such a stunt. I think that Bob has tried to remain true to himself, and he's not going to go thanking anybody for an award that he may or may not see the value in. I really wonder if he sees it as valueless.
Well, I don't know. I mean, he certainly doesn't need the money, but I wonder if, again, if his humility just says, I mean, I don't think he's playing hard to get. I just, the other thing that's interesting about this is that you mentioned how others, including us, are contextualizing him to death. He doesn't contextualize himself either. And from one of the articles you and I exchanged this week, he actually is quoted as saying, talking about a hard rain's going to fall, which we deconstructed to death. Fun to death last week. Apparently, Hard Rain's Going to Fall was written during the Cuban Missile Crisis in October of 1962. Yet, while many people think it's about the end of the world and atomic fallout, he said, no, it's not about atomic rain. It's just a hard rain. It's not the fallout rain, just some sort of end that can happen. When I say the pellets of poison are flooding their waters, it just means all the lies that people get told on their radios and in their newspapers. It's so understated, yet it could be Trumpian. You could see Trump using Dylan lyrics to understate the things that he clearly overstates.
Well, I wonder if in 1963 Dylan saw as much conspiracy theory as we today have proven via WikiLeaks. I mean, it's a very corrupt system in which anyone political functions. Voters, those running for office, those elected to office, we know on many layers it is a very corrupt system. And I wonder if in 63 Dylan tried to cloak his political views inside of some really, really good poetry in the name of folk music. You know? And now today, he doesn't want to participate in the quote-unquote mainstream media, and he's putting out Frank Sinatra tribute albums, thinking he's Rod Stewart, and all kinds of strange behavior. And it's, it's probably because he's still alive that he thinks, I'll just keep producing, I'll keep doing something.
And not to mention the worst Christmas album ever done, as I told you before. I think it's interesting that you brought up the WikiLeaks stuff again because we did address that in our very first show together, and it occurred to me that there's a really nice connection between that show and this topic. I think the hero of the week, in some ways, is the junior senator from Florida, Mr. Rubio, who said at a debate, I am not going to do anything with the WikiLeaks material. I don't like that it's been hacked by a foreign power, and while today it's the Democrats, tomorrow it could be us. How interesting and deep for him to mention that. But the reason why I bring that up is actually to pat you and me on the back, because we spoke to that in the very first show where we talked about, have we reached the end of privacy and privacy at all levels? And, Bob Dylan, in his Try to Find Me, Catch Me If You Can, to give me an award and, have me formally acknowledge that you've given me one, may be holding out to prove that we have not reached the end of privacy.
Well, I mean, he's getting $60 a ticket for the cheap seats in Albuquerque. He's not trying to be a private person, but he's definitely trying to define his representation in the public sphere. I mean, we're talking about one sentence on the man's, website, whether or not he's acknowledging the Nobel Prize in Literature. I mean, I wonder if he's still doing this 3 weeks from now. It may be a publicity stunt. I'm glad we have not gushed over Dylan in the way that some have. I draw your attention to the article that you drew my attention to, casting Bob Dylan as not the next Walt Whitman or a successor to Walt Whitman or in the tradition of Walt Whitman, but truly, quote, surpassed Walt Whitman as the American poet. This article, which I'm looking at from Bloomberg, Cass Sustein, October 13, the explanation and article about why Bob Dylan surpasses Whitman The argument extends no further than the first sentence. We're just throwing Walt Whitman's name into this like it's cultural tokenism. The man changed his name to because of Dylan Thomas, and I have yet to see anyone contextualize contextualize Bob Dylan in terms of American poetry, and in terms of Dylan Thomas's effect on American poetry. It's getting insane.
See, you and I disagree on this, and I thought this was a great. I thought this was a wonderful testament to him, especially because he did deconstruct lyrics to demonstrate, to prove. I mean, the most. I would argue that if not the most famous poetic words in American history, certainly the most important and globally recognized words of poetry in American history are "Captain, My Captain," which is Walt Whitman writing about the death of Abraham Lincoln. He makes the argument in here to me that there are some really important pieces of poetry in Dylan's work and where they come from. But that's okay.
Yeah, it's okay, but Dylan's stance in a psychological way is very 20th century, and Whitman is something different than that. Whitman saw a connection between all living things, and Whitman would never make the public put up with what Bob Dylan called, like a Rolling Stone, quote, a long piece of vomit. Whitman would never make his audience endure that. Neither would Dylan Thomas. These two people revised the hell out of what they did, and they were proud of it by the time they got it done. So in that way, Dylan's lyrics, yeah, it's great. How does it feel to be on your own with no direction home? And Dylan said in an interview, according to this Bloomberg article, that song was, quote, a steady hatred directed at some place that was honest. That's great. That's wonderful. A piece of steady hatred is certainly very mid-20th century, but I'm sorry, Walt Whitman would never put up with that. He saw poetry, and so did Dylan Thomas, as a noble endeavor, as Dylan does. And I think maybe that's why he's, kind of staying mute on the subject, because he knows in the tradition of those poets, he does not hold up. And this article just throws Whitman's name into it. It is a lovely piece of rhetorical analysis. I'll give you that, but we're losing the grasp of what poetry is. Lay Lady Lay is, that's cute and all, but it's a couple stanzas.
Dylan, here's another line from that article from 1966. He hated being described as the voice of a generation. Asked how he thinks of himself, he said, "I see myself as a song and dance man." That's obviously a joke. Booed in the 60s for turning away from protest songs, he said with sarcasm and contempt, "All my songs are protest songs. That's all I do is protest." Songs were more important than just light entertainment. They were a different republic, some liberated republic. He did not like mainstream culture, lame as hell, and a big trick. Well, so your argument is that Dylan is not poetry.
I'm arguing that Dylan is poetry, and nobody's given him that credit except the Nobel Committee, and American culture is scrambling to understand what the heck poetry is. I didn't send you the article from the New Republic, which was on October 6th, but they were trying to guess who's going to get the Nobel Prize in Literature. And sure enough, they were rallying. Oh, gee, it's been, since 1993 that an American has won. But the subtitle of their article was, who's going to win? Quote, not Bob Dylan, that's for sure. They gave Bob the same odds as Thomas Pynchon and gave John Ashbery a 100-to-1 shot. Their biggest American choice was Joyce Carol Oates. They totally got it wrong.
Dylan was handicapped. I read, you can't bet on this here, but you could have bet on it in England at Ladbrokes or Paddy Power in Ireland. Dylan was handicapped at 16-1, I believe, the week of the no-go. Now, you could have you put $100 down on that. That would have been nice. But then again, who actually puts money on poets?
I would have given
Right?
if you had given me the opportunity here live on Trigger Warnings, I would not have taken you up on illegal betting, but it is an interesting idea. Well, here on Trigger Warnings, Challenging Talk Radio, John Ross and Chris Smith, we're talking Bob Dylan for the second week in a row. And where should we go? Should we go to let's go to your song first. We've each chosen a song for this week, and John has chosen one of Bob's gems.
Yeah, this is With God on Our Side. Now, are you going to be singing this verse to verse, verse by verse?
I'm not prepared to sing this song. It's a very, very good song that requires more than what I have, which is a 5-string open G banjo. But feel free. Would you like a poetic reading of it, or would you like to read it verse by verse?
No, well, we can alternate. I'll read the first verse and then we can go at it. Oh, my name, it is nothing. My age, it means less. The country I came from is called the Midwest. I was taught and brought up there the laws to abide, and the land that I live in has God on its side. There are 5, 6, 7, there are 9 verses in this. They all are in the same fairly simple A-B rhyme form. So every, there's well, no, I'm sorry. It's the even numbered lines in each stanza rhyme. The others don't.
If you went down the A-B, etc. rhyme scheme, then what is it now?
No, it's not. The even numbered stanza, the even numbered lines, the 2nd and 4th rhyme with each other, the 6th and the 8th rhyme with each other. So in this case, West, Midwest, abide, side rhyme. What's so fascinating about the song, and it does it progressively through, after establishing that he was born in the Midwest, Hibbing, Minnesota, it then goes, it's retrospective and progressive, so it goes back to American history. It goes to American history, and basically the wars we fought and how we conquered this land we call the U.S. of A. What this reminds me of throughout, but especially the first stanza, is how we teach history in this country. History, and there are a lot of wonderful books on this. Lies, my teacher taught me, and a lot of other books on this. But history is the least popular subject in schools. It's in K through 12. It's also the worst taught. And the reason why is because we teach history. There's 2 reasons. One is we teach dates. 1492, 1776, 1941 hike, right? But the second reason, and bigger than that, is that we teach history as propaganda. We teach it to breed and fertilize American exceptionalism, which is a good way to teach history if you're in North Korea, or at least North Korean exceptionalism. But it's not a good way to do so in a country that is, has as much power and influence as we do. And this song lays out at the very beginning that, well, of course, God's on our side. That why wouldn't God be on our side, right? And I think the whole notion of that this is the shining city on the hill, the last great hope of mankind, all of which have significant elements of truth, is really brought out here and kind of torn apart, don't you think?
I do. the second stanza. Oh, the history books tell it. They tell it so well. The cavalry's charged. The Indians fell. The cavalry's charged. The Indians died. Oh, the country was young with God on its side. It's historical revisionism, is it not? 1963 inside of a folk song?
Actually, there's nothing revisionist about it. It's all literal. That's what's so interesting about it.
Well, the implication is that the history books did not tell the entire tale. I think the implication of this song is that this vision that this person was brought up with in the Midwest is insufficient. And that insufficiency comes in line one. My name, it is nothing. And my age, it means less. From that point on, expectations of, the upbringing of the speaker have to be pretty darn low.
Well, there's a timelessness to it, which suggests the notion of exceptionalism. It doesn't matter, 1710, 1946, 2016, we're always number one, and God is always with us.
Go ahead.
It also suggests that this is a myth that is passed on and on and on and on. My grandfather before me, my grandchildren after me, they will all. This is what we are told, that God is on our side. That these are American values, and that everything we have done in the name of, whether it's westward expansion or quasi-colonialism or keeping the world safe for democracy, etc.
Now, wait a minute. Bob does not mention anything about taxation without representation or any sort of literal Tea Party or anything like that. We go from the, quote, Indians, the cavalry, and then, quote, the Spanish-American War had its day, and the Civil War, too, was soon laid away. And the names of the heroes I was made to memorize with guns in their hands and God on their side.
Exactly.
Brings us to like 1865 or so.
Right. He starts, the cavalry charged the Indians. So he starts this recount of history somewhere in the 1820s, 1830s. He doesn't address, that's actually the interesting point, he does not address the actual founding of the country and the revolution, even whether it was about God, because while many today in their revisionism would argue that this is Judaism, we are a Christian country, we're founded by Judeo-Christian, there's lots of evidence that would indicate that it was not. The whole idea of separation of church and state was to divorce ourselves from the notion that God would be on our side, and to further decouple the notion of God from the empires and kingdoms and monarchies of Europe that made all this bad stuff happen. That actually led people to come to this country and say, we got to get out of Europe, where it really matters who your father was to have any place in society.
Well, what matters most, remember, this is a nameless speaker, a speaker that is immediately, first thing, admitting they have no name. But in stanza 3, it's the names of the heroes, the Civil War heroes. This person was made to memorize. I think the role of the individual here, inside of the country, is what's at hand. The next stanza, the First World War, boys, it closed out its fate. The reason for fighting I never got straight, but I learned to accept it with pride, for you don't count the dead when God's on your side.
Yeah, that is an interesting testament to history. The Spanish-American War, which he gives exactly 6 words of time to, is glossed over because it was talk about a constructed, manufactured war. it was basically fought to kind of show off our stuff and go out and colonialize. He does very quickly move into and spend a lot of time on the 20th century, which is, I don't know, is that because he knows that the attention span of most Americans is so short that they don't know what the Spanish-American War was? Why do you think he just jumps into this? Or I mean, he's only gone 3 stanzas and he's already into the First World War, which is, 45 years before the time the song was written.
There's only one more historical stanza. When the Second World War came to an end, we forgave the Germans and we were friends. Though they murdered 6 million in the ovens they fried, the Germans now too have God on their side. And I think, like most poems, here's the turn. There had to be forgiveness somewhere, somehow, inside of this stanza. And it has to be God's forgiveness. This nameless speaker isn't involved in that. Though there is this like royal we forgave the Germans. So I guess in this stanza, both the individual has recognized their submission into the state, but also there had to have been God's forgiveness, that the Germans now too have God on their side. From that point, that point forward, we're in the present tense.
Yeah, I see that differently. I see it as that to the victor go the spoils, and part of the spoils are we get to remake them in our own image. And now they see God the same way we see God. Although they were Christians too, they used God in their propaganda, in their coming to power, in their everything they were doing in their campaigns. I wonder if this is also Dylan's Jewishness poking its head out here, because he doesn't really like the idea that we've decided to forgive the Germans. They murdered 6 million in the ovens they fried. That's pretty, that's comparable to the little children with the swords and the guns that we talked about last week in The Hard Rain's Gonna Fall. And my sense is that the individual in this, the nameless individual, is rising out of his namelessness and saying, hey, is this a good idea that we really forgave these people who destroyed 6 million of my ancestors? It's where Dylan kind of moves from being namelessness, or the narrator in the song moves from the namelessness to saying, wait a minute, I had direct bloodlines to these people. You think there's something? See, I disagree with you on that. But
no. I mean, I think the individual still remains nameless, but I think the last couplet in that stanza, the Germans now, too, have God on their side. After this history lesson with Bob Dylan, we're now in the present tense, right?
No, I agree. They now have God on their side because they are out. They capitulated to us, and they allowed us to rebuild their country in our image. And we took their nukes away, and we put soldiers in their country so they never do it again. And now we're part of an alliance. So
you think the implication is to seek God's forgiveness? You have to seek.
No, I don't think it's about God's forgiveness at all. Because my impression is this is not about God forgiving. We quote forgave unquote the Germans, not because we forgave them, but because they capitulated, and now they're on our side. We don't know if God is on their side, but they're on our side. God's on our side to complete the triangle. It's a tautology, isn't it?
I'm sorry, a tautology?
Yeah, A equals B, B equals C, therefore A equals C. God is on our side. Germans are our friends, therefore God is on the German side because they're with us. Not that God's forgiven them, but they're on the God team. We are the quarterback of the God team, and the Germans are with us. That's how I see this. I don't.
Well, I will tell you the rhyme scheme is A B C B D E D. And regardless of how we're supposed to feel about the Germans, the next stanza is trying to be more brave in how I'm supposed to feel about people from another country. I've learned to hate Russians all through my whole life. If another war starts, it's them we must fight. To hate them and fear them, to run and to hide, and accept it all bravely with God on my side.
Not on my side, that's right. Well, because we're hating and fearing and running and hiding. And where are we running, hating and fearing and running and hiding to? Here's another history context. In 1963 or whenever it was written.
3.
Where are we hiding to in 1963?
Fallout shelters.
Fallout shelters. You are correct.
Duck and cover.
Duck and cover and get your MREs, your meals ready to eat. You know what's really, and I'm going to make a really wacky connection here. And I'm going to forget the name of the movie. Like Bob Dylan.
What a setup. What a setup, man. That's great.
I forget the name. You're going to help me with the movie. Like the Coen brothers, Bob Dylan is a Jew from Minnesota. And I got to find the name. I can look it up while we're talking. The Coen brothers did a movie about growing up Jewish in Minnesota about the same time Bob Dylan did. And the climactic final scene in it.
Whoa, what is this?
It's about
spoiler alert to a movie we can't name?
No, it's not a spoiler alert. No, it's about a bunch of kids running to a fallout shelter in the eye of a huge tornado that's about to wipe them out. And I'm just making Minnesota Jewish connections here through art and literature, and if I can put Al Franken in it, I think I've got a trifecta. But I'm just, there's this sense of there is a sense of impending doom here, which is also in art and literature and history characteristic of the Jewish experience. And I think Bob Dylan is, in many cases in this song, not just teaching us the other side of history, but he is also shedding light on kind of what it's like to be from certain classes of people who have been treated badly throughout their history. That's kind of a counterpoint to the American God is with us.
If Bob wants to send somebody in his place to accept the Nobel, perhaps Al Franken would be a good choice.
I would go. I think you should have me come and do this. That would be pretty good.
Hey, let's finish the rhetorical analysis here of the song With God on Our Side by Bob Dylan here on Trigger Warnings, challenging talk radio. We've got a few more stanzas. We've gotten to the part about hating the Russians and accept it all bravely with God on my side. More recognition of the individual inside of the function of the state. The next verse, but now we got weapons of the chemical dust. If fire them we're forced to, then fire them we must. One push of the button and a shot the world wide, and you never ask questions when God's on your side.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
I'll continue.
By the way, this is part of the contemporary meme that, well, just trust us. We know what we're doing. We've got nukes. Just trust us. We know what we're doing. Don't you think there's some element of that here, and that in a nuclear era, there's even less control because you need many, many fewer people to be in the military to fight such wars, and therefore war itself affects fewer of us and in different ways. I mean, World War II, everybody was involved in the war. Almost everybody in one way or another. The war touched everybody.
You know what? I'm starting to wonder if Bob is remaining silent about his Nobel because any participation in the mainstream media will only make him complicit. He refuses to be clickbait aside Donald Trump. He refuses. He will not have it. And the only thing the media could talk about is how Bob Dylan will say nothing. I also haven't seen any journalism that plugs like the fact that he is actually on tour and he's off doing his Bob Dylan thing. But I wonder now, as we're assessing this song, you never ask questions when God's on your side. And there is so much going on in the mainstream media about people who believe they don't have to ask questions because truly God or some other higher entity is on their side and helping them rally in a political way. And he just wants nothing to do with it. He didn't
Yeah.
inside of this song in 1963.
Well, if it's either from Isaiah or the Luke, but there's a wonderful line that Handel wrote. I mean, it was already written, but he put the music to it in the Messiah that goes, "If God is with us, who can be against us?" And that, of course, has been the rallying cry of just about every military or uh, conquest venture ever attempted on Earth, ever. That God's always with us. I mean, jihad, everything. I mean, frankly, in war, everything is a jihad, right? The more jihad or final campaign, holy war it is, the more you can move and motivate not just the soldiers who are fighting and dying, but the people who are paying for the soldiers to fight and die. And it does, and the idea that every military or conquistadorial adventure or venture ever contemplated and ever attempted has invoked the word of God puts a different tack on the word just war. Or as Jimmy Carter said upon the invasion of Iraq, is it a just war or just war? I think there's a lot to this that he gets at in this song, and God knows, there's a double entendre. And certainly the last two stanzas just put that like right between the eyeballs.
Well, I think it's the title of the song is important. I'm not sure if poem titles usually maintain the same importance, but Dylan's titles are important with God on our side. I think that collective pronoun seals the deal before you get the full explanation. We started with the individual trying to figure out if they're to what extent submissive to the state, and the last two stanzas really seal it. Through many dark hour, I've been thinking about this, that Jesus Christ was betrayed by a kiss. But I can't think for you. You'll have to decide whether Judas Iscariot had God on his side. So now I'm leaving. I'm weary as hell. The confusion I'm feeling ain't no tongue can tell. The words fill my head and fall to the floor. If God's on our side, he'll stop the next war.
Yeah, see, that is really, they're simple words. They're Lincoln-esque in their simplicity, and they're really good. And he's leaving. Where is he leaving to, by the way? It's back to the eye. Where is he leaving? Is he dying?
Well, the words fill my head and fall to the floor. I think in the last show I identified a couplet that kind of counts as a Dylan cop-out right at the end of a really good folk song, kind of picks you up and drops you off the cliff without resolution, and I think this song does it. Here's the reason why people won't tolerate Bob Dylan's songs separate from Bob Dylan performing them. It's it does not leave you with resolution. So now I'm leaving. And you're right. Where is he leaving? I'm weary as hell, which tells me he's not going to hell. The confusion I'm feeling ain't no tongue can tell. All right, it's the individual and the individual's conflict based on this understanding of how their relationship to the state. But when the words fill my head and fall to the floor, we're done. That's it. That's it. Excuse me, teacher, my brain is full.
Well, and the other thing that he rhetorically turns this on its axis because it's the only stanza that does not end with some variation of God on someone's side. It's the next to last line, right? If God's on our side, he'll stop the next war. Well, it's the only stanza that questions whether God is on our side, right? With God on our side is different from if God's on our side. So it now takes the certainty of God being, that we're on the God team, out of the mix. And so, well, here's one way to test it.
Right, it was never a certainty. The title of the song is a prepositional phrase, and I think it's put as an if statement, and the final resignation of the individual is I don't know if God's on our side. Hey,
But
yeah?
there's a reason why he uses the word hell here.
Why is that?
I'm weary as hell. I don't know. Hell is the opposite of God. Is it not?
I think I mean, based on the second to last stanza, two famous individuals show up, Jesus Christ and Judas Iscariot. The implication of the word hell in the couplet following that stanza is Judas in hell. I think, will any of us end up in hell? Will the soldiers? Will anybody named in here? The Russians, the Germans, the 6 million, the First World War boys, the Civil War, the heroes whose names we had to memorize, the Indians, the Calvaries, the Indians. The last place we end up with, besides the floor upon which Bob's brain lies, is hell.
Yeah, there's a line from the other article I sent you that relates to this. Wisdom from Bob Dylan from his very first stops in Chicago. This is by Rick Hogan, who was the Chicago Tribune's entertainment writer. And Bob Dylan made his first performance tour to Chicago in 1963, the year I was birthed. But he speaks, he digs up a column, a review from a Tribune columnist, a woman who interviewed him in a trip here in 1964 when he performed at Ravinia, which is the summer music home of the Chicago Symphony and others. And in her review from June 17th, 1964 in the Chicago Tribune, this otherwise unknown columnist, Mary Merrifield, goes to the Bob Dylan concert and she writes, "The trouble with people today is that they wear masks. Once you get through to them, they love to talk honestly to you." And from the review of the column, she writes, "Mother, Dad, and all you adults who are concerned about not understanding young people and worried about the times in which we live, I have a message for you. Read or listen to the songs that Bob Dylan, folk singer, writes and sings. If you do, I think you'll dig him just as nearly 4,000 young people did. These high school and college kids seemed to be part of him, or he of them. I only wished and wished that more parents had been there." And it's a song like this, and certainly a song like The Times They Are Changing, that gives that statement. If only more parents were tuned into this and tuned into what he's saying to their children, that really comes through in this song. Because the 60s were, as you said last week, the 60s were the end of the 50s. And maybe the Cuban Missile Crisis was the end of the 50s because it was the absolute height of the Cold War, and if you had odds on that, there were pretty good odds that we all would have been wiped out. And a lot of people grew up in that, including people like Bob Dylan. And the parents were in another world because they were stuck to a large extent in this kind of bipolar world of conflict. And I think this song really brings it out. I'm sure it's less deep than he intended it, or it's not as deep as to him as you and I are contextualizing it. But I think there's some real power in that. That if the parents who saw him as a protest singer and as someone who therefore was dangerous, to the influence on their children, had not seen him that way or seen him less that way, and actually connected with their kids who are connecting with him, you might have had some different results in families and in political and cultural trials of that time.
Yeah, I mean, he's been written about plenty, but how Bob influenced the '60s, it's incredible. It's incredible, and this article is a good one. Um, with God on Our Side, 1963. What an old song. Hey, you're listening to what's that? What's that?
I would say many great things were born in 1963. Just keep that.
Well, you're listening to Trigger Warnings, Challenging Talk Radio, featuring John Ross and Chris Smith, and we are contextualizing Bob Dylan for a second show in a row. Hope you're enjoying. And right now, a very special segment that John has no idea we're going to do, but I've got in front of me a list of other famous 75-year-olds. And we're going to do a side-by-side comparison of some of these people up against Bob Dylan, and you could tell me who would win in an arm wrestling match. You could tell me who would win in a WWE fight. You could tell me who's more culturally relevant and why, but it's amazing the number of people born in that are 75 years old, and Bob Dylan's peers. The first one being David Crosby.
Oh, who?
David Crosby.
David Crosby would beat him in a wrestling match or a arm wrestling match.
By weight. By weight, probably.
Well, certainly by weight, but Dylan would be bored, and Dylan would go off.
Okay, Dylan versus Placido Domingo.
I think the two of them probably would really hit it off. I think they would. That could be a bromance. I don't think they would arm wrestle. I think they would. I think Dylan would. I think he would. Placido would be revealed to have a real inkling for folk music and would start singing Italian folk tunes or some Tuscan war chants.
Okay, Bob, this is famous 75-year-olds versus the famous 75-year-old Nobel laureate Bob Dylan. How about Bob versus Paul Anka?
That's interesting. I don't know. They would probably talk about what it's like to sing in nightclubs in Vegas. I think Dylan would probably just not be very interested. I'm trying to think that Paul Anka actually wrote some popular tunes in his day.
He did. He did. Hey, here's an old. You said bromance. Here's a true romance. Bob Dylan versus Joan Baez.
Ooh, well, I mean, they are birds of a feather. She loved them. She recorded how many of his hits did he cover? She certainly covered Masters of War.
I think they were in a relationship for a time, and according to cultural lore, Bob dumped her when she tried to get him into radical politics. Now, I wasn't there, but that's what they say. Hey, how about Bob Dylan versus Nick Nolte in an arm wrestling match?
Oh, Nick Nolte would take that. Nick Nolte for sure would take that.
Bob Dylan versus Jesse Jackson.
By the way, I don't know when Bob Dylan turned 75, but for a time this year, until September 5th, he overlapped at the age of 75 with someone else, an icon in her own right, with whom he had a torrid affair. And if there was ever an example of Beauty and the Beast, at least on the surface, can you name this person who is now 76, September 4th?
Yeah, I don't know. On my list is Elvis's girlfriend, Anne Margaret, but I'm not sure who you're talking about.
Raquel Welch.
Ah. Okay, well, only a few more here. Other famous...
But as Joan Baez had a thing with him, Raquel Welch and Bob Dylan. Now that is amazing.
How about I would pay for a $60 ticket to see an arm wrestling match between Bob Dylan and Martha Stewart.
Is she wearing ankle bracelets or not? Because I think that would give him an unfair advantage if she were wearing ankle bracelets.
Hey, you know who else is Bob Dylan's age? Dick Cheney. Now there's a comparison for you. Think about these two were born in the same year and how they spent their lives and influenced this country, but also the world. I'm not sure who else on this list has been as influential. It's scary. It's not. Wait a minute. I
know. Go ahead.
Well, I think one of the classic songwriter debates will be Bob Dylan versus fellow 75-year-old person Paul Simon.
Oh.
Who do you prefer between Bob and Paul Simon?
I think Dylan would win the arm wrestling because Paul Simon is tiny.
He is very, very small. But when it comes to songwriters, do you have a preference between the two?
I think they can coexist. I mean, I think Dylan is more prolific and more. I don't think Paul Simon is at the level of a Nobel for his literature and his rhetoric, but his music is great, and I frankly think that he had a significant role in some of what happened in South Africa by bringing the culture of Ladysmith Black Mambazo into a whole album. I mean, that was pretty impressive. So I think he gets a lot of credit for cultural influence. I don't think his words, although Sound of Silence is pretty deep. It's Dylan-esque in many ways, because it has some of those references, right? People talking without hearing, people listening with whatever, all those things that Dylan does, right? 2,000 drummers beating their drums and nobody hears them. People with, Paul Simon might have liberally borrowed from Bob Dylan on those. But
if you know your Simon and Garfunkel, there's a Bob Dylan tribute song on one of their earlier albums. Okay, the final celebrity matchup. 75-year-old Bob Dylan versus 75-year-old Bernie Sanders.
Yeah, I was going to say Bernie. I thought Bernie was the first one. Well, I think, they have so much in common.
Then why didn't Bob go sing a song for him?
I don't think, does Bob do political stuff? Does he do endorsements? I don't think he does.
I hope he's not waiting till he's going to be 105 to start. And, if people look around and say, oh, shucks, the country's a mess, or as he's been saying since 1963, the mainstream media is something I despise, I'm not sure why he hasn't been more participatory in the democracy and not just, man who is willing to grab a couple $100 for those front row seats as he bumps around the country, ignoring the Nobel Prize, wearing funny hats.
I just don't think Dylan does that. I think Dylan lets people do with his music what they want. To go back to the Cass Sunstein article that you didn't like, that the expression of what's Walt Whitman-esque about him is I'll read the exact phrase. The celebrating the capacity for self-invention is the highest form of freedom. I think that's how Dylan thinks. You know, do what
Wait
you
a
want
minute.
with my
Wait a
freedom.
minute.
That's your freedom. I'm not going to get
Yeah, but the
political.
freedom for the words to fall out of my head and onto the floor. I'm not sure. I'm not sure to what extent Bob wants to participate in the mainstream mess that's going on around him.
I agree, and that's what I'm saying. I don't think he wishes to take sides. I don't think I think he wishes to be. I mean, he's made clear of his disdain for the traditional, lefty, folky protest people. He actually called them fat, and not in a PHAT context. He just didn't like that. So I think he has been quite clear in his apartisanship, not nonpartisan, apartisanship.
Apartisanship?
He just doesn't care.
You're listening to Trigger Warnings, challenging talk radio featuring Chris Smith and John Ross, who just coined a term.
No, apartisan is there is it is a word.
Okay, well, I think something that's noble about Bob Dylan is that he has constantly and consistently been responsible for the reinvention of Bob Dylan. And he has made it his mission to reinvent the image of Bob Dylan that we may know. And I think he doesn't have a response to the Nobel Committee, and therefore he hasn't made one. And he tried to get a sentence together and failed. And he removed that sentence. Well, good for him. Anybody that wants to be that scrutinous of how they are represented, it's pretty cool. It's pretty cool. And speaking of reinvention, the song that I'm bringing to the table is one that it's worth knowing its origin. Famously, The Band, right? The Band, called The Band, was Bob Dylan's kind of backup band in the late 60s, and they recorded a number of tracks, both in the studio and in the basement of a house in upstate New York called The Big Pink. And those tapes were leaked onto something that the label just couldn't resist making the money on because everybody had them anyway, so they released them in 74, called them The Basement Tapes. Recently, all of the Basement Tapes have been released, so you can listen to all of the outtakes and the murmuring and stuttering of Bob Dylan leading his band together. But I'm bringing the song because it's a very outright political song. I'll do a verse and then the chorus. Well, that big dumb blonde with her wheel of gorge, and Turtle, that friend of theirs with his cheeks all forged, and the cheeks in the chunk and the cheese in the cash, they're all gonna be there at that $1 million bash. Ooh, baby, ooh, wee. Ooh, baby, ooh, wee. It's that $1 million bash. John, what does that mean?
I did not realize it was political. I thought it was a kind of a fun description of a wild party, and
I think by party, I think you're right. It is a description of a wild party. I'm not sure if it's the Democratic Party or the Republican Party,
no,
but I think that's what you got going on.
I think now I suppose a $1 million bash back in 1960, whatever it was, that was a pretty expensive party.
Yeah, we're talking about the elite here, the big dumb blonde. Now, Google, if you ask for the lyrics, they changed it to Big Dump Blonde. With her wheel of gorge.
Wheel in the gorge.
Depends on who you ask. I wish Bob was here. Hey, Bob, you can tweet us at @T_warnings and let us know what are these actual lyrics. And Turtle, that friend of theirs with his checks all forged. These are people of status. And his cheeks in a chunk and the cheese in the cash, they're all going to be there at that $1 Million Bash. It's pretty good. It's absurdist, right? Or do you see it as more?
And these are not necessarily people from the elite. These are people who wish to be associated with or seen as the elite. I'm not quite sure they are the elite.
I don't know. I don't know who else can afford $1 Million Bash. Everybody from right there to over there and back. The louder they come, the bigger they crack. Come now, sweet cream, don't forget to flash. We're all gonna meet at the $1 Million Bash. Ooh, baby, ooh, wee. Ooh, baby, ooh, wee. It's that $1 Million Bash. The louder they come, the bigger they crack. It's that there was a big reggae album at the time. The bigger they come, the harder they fall. I think it was the name of it.
Yeah, I'm not sure what the louder they come, the bigger they crack is. I don't know if crack is crack their identities, their false personas cracking. Is it? I mean, I see that line, and I think of people wearing big, flashy clothes.
I think of Donald J. Trump.
You could think of the
louder they come, the bigger they crack. That is the larger space you want to take up in the rhetorical sphere, the larger space you will have to be able to disintegrate, right? And fall apart under the weight of your own personality. Yeah, I think it's Bob looking from the outside in. Maybe wanting, imagining himself as part of the elite, imagining himself at that $1 Million Bash. It is a very silly song, so I don't want to read too much into it. But the first stanza is about these other people, and the second stanza is about these other people, and then the third stanza is about Bob himself, or the speaker of the song. Well, I took my counselor out to the barn. Silly Nellie was there, she told him a yarn. Along came Jones and emptied the trash, and everybody went down to that $1 Million Bash. Ooh, baby, ooh, wee. Ooh, baby, ooh, wee. It's that $1 Million Bash.
Who's Jones? Who could Jones be, or is it just somebody?
Who's Jones?
Yeah.
Bob had already become really well known for the line, you don't know what time it is, do you, Mr. Jones? So that's possible. Silly Nellie was there. Could be anybody.
Could be anybody, or it could just be an alliterative throwaway line. I don't, that's just it. It just sounds like a wild, druggy party, and just lots of stuff. I'm not sure what it matters that Jones emptied the trash. It may or may. Jones could be the butler.
I guess the inciting incident of the stanza is the most intriguing. I took my counselor out to the barn. Why would you do that? What does that mean, Bob? What does that mean? Well, I'm hitting it too hard, my stones won't take. I get up in the morning, but it's too early to wake. First it's hello, goodbye, then we push and then we crash. But we're all gonna make it at that $1 Million Bash.
You know what this sounds like?
What?
It sounds like the way people who have been to Burning Man, or at least before it became hyper quasi-commercial, talk about the place. So that it's like going on your trip to Mecca, your countercultural, open air, walk around naked in the sand, Mecca. component to it. I've never been to Burning Man, so I cannot speak from that perspective, but it just has, there's just a lot of weird people walking around, and everybody just kind of gets along. And,
Yeah, and I think I have not been to Burning Man either, but I have been to enough music festivals to understand that sense of other people as an accessory to the experience that you're having. As in stanzas 1, 2, and 3, other people show up, and Jones is emptying trash, and we're telling yarns in the barn, and other things that rhyme. But here in the fourth stanza, Bob turns inward. I'm hitting it too hard, and my stones won't take. What a great line. I get up in the early. I get up in the morning, but it's too early to wake. First, it's hello, goodbye. I wonder if which came first. You say yes, I say no. You say hi, and I say go 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 from the Beatles, or this hello goodbye from Bob. And no matter how much he looks inward, we still make it to the $1 Million Bash. Maybe it's heaven. Maybe that's what it is.
Could be. Could be. I don't know. I'm not sure what makes it $1 Million Bash. I get the impression that this doesn't really sound like a fancy party. It just sounds like a place where people who have a lot of money or people who want to be associated with those they believe are the elite go. But it sounds like $1 Million Bash because he doesn't really, he doesn't describe an opulent setting. There's no ostentatiousness of this other than in the people who are attending it. And actually, he describes a rather Spartan, pedestrian kind of environment. He doesn't describe anything about the setting. There's a barn. That doesn't sound like $1 Million band or $1 Million Bash. He just really talks about people and these kind of strange people. But there's nothing about this bash that sounds like it's got there's no food, there's no drink. It's just people knowing. That's why I say it has this Burning Man quality to it.
Well, it really does remind me of the Donald Trump phenomenon, and that's something that drew me to it, because, as Trump continues to rally and come, see me live and Gettysburg Address and everything else, the man's going to do absolutely anything, and to sell attendance at the rally or participation in the mainstream media by watching it or anything else, it's really, hey, here's an invitation to the greatest thing you've ever seen. $1 Million Bash, right? We're going to have jobs. We're going to have everything. I looked at my watch. I looked at my wrist. I punched myself in the face with my fist. I took my potatoes down to be mashed. Then I made it on over to that $1 Million Bash. Ooh, baby. Ooh, wee. Ooh, baby. Ooh, wee. It's that $1 Million Bash. I punched myself in the face with my fist.
This is, was it Faulkner? I'm going to get this wrong. This is a bunch of sound and fury signifying nothing, which I think is the whole point of the song. I was so bored that I looked at my watch, I looked at my wrist, and then I was even more bored trying to look at my wrist. I punched myself in my face. And then I don't know what my potatoes are that were down to be mashed. I'm sure that means something, but maybe it doesn't, because the only item that's described that exists at this bash is a potato.
and that Bob cannot himself mash his potatoes. It's something that requires somebody else to do. And maybe it is a drug reference. Hey,
maybe it is right, because if you took potatoes to be mashed, they could be in some white powdery form, especially after you hit yourself in the face with your fist, and you might be seeing double, or your sense of smell might be compromised.
Well, this has been a $1,000,000 bash here on Trigger Warnings, challenging talk radio, featuring John Ross and Chris Smith, our second, and I guess it's our final Bob Dylan rhetorical analysis
There may
power
know. I
hour.
told you. I think we may need. We could consider having one in honor of his. Actually, he actually showed up in Stockholm.
So that means
But no.
the next show will be a return to politics
Well, we only have 2 weeks left
before the end of creation.
before the Britain 2.0 administration. I think.
Hey, do you have a quote to end this show? I have a very good one, and I'd love to hear your response.
I did not come up with one because. Well, I mean, I've given several from Bob Dylan.
True,
So,
true. Well, I've been reading this book, and I've got a passage that really strikes me, and I think it describes Bob. And I would recommend this book to anyone that has time to want to understand the mid 20th century contextualization of the poet. And it's called Don Quixote's Profession by Mark Van Doren, himself a poet and professor. But check this out. And
by the way,
yes.
know who Mark Van Doren is? I believe.
Well, he's the well-known poet, short story writer, and critic, and professor of English at Columbia.
Yes.
He's also known for his critical studies of Shakespeare, John Dryden, Thoreau, Hawthorne, Edgar.
Yes,
Yes.
that would make him the brother of whom?
I don't know.
Charles Van Doren.
Oh, okay.
His show. That's the Van Doren family. Columbia, they're still men of letters. I don't think there are any women in that family. In fact, one of the brothers, John, is here in Chicago. He's the chairman. He worked for Britannica, Encyclopedia Britannica, and was chairman of the board of the Poetry Foundation of Chicago, for which I once did a volunteer consulting project, and I met John Van Doren, and John Van Doren looked exactly like Rod Steiger, the actor, who played their father. What's the quote from Van Doren?
You tell me if this reminds you more of Bob Dylan or Donald J. Trump.
Okay.
To act as he acts is more than to ape. To imitate as he does is finally to understand. What is the difference between acting like a great man and being one? To act like a poet is to write poems. To act like a statesman is to ponder the nature of goodness and justice. To act like a knight is to think and feel like one. When we tell a boy to act like a man, we are not advising him to be dishonest. Act well your part. There all the honor lies. No one has ever detected cynicism in Alexander Pope's line right there. We even urge people to act natural, as if to be themselves required the exercise of art. And it does, as those unsure of themselves well know. All they have to do is to become sure. And then we shall say in praise of them that they are acting like themselves.
It makes me think of what Melania Trump said about her husband 10 days ago. Sometimes I feel I have two boys in the house. Or something to that effect. No, I mean, that's or what in the academic world is referred to as performance versus performativity.
Ooh, oh no. We've hit upon performativity. And I agree. I think that quote, act your part, because that's where the honor is. That is rather cynical. I mean, it has become a 21st century cynicism. As people that act their part gain the spotlight. Or they're not acting like themselves, they're acting their part. And maybe that's why Bob has not answered. the Nobel Committee.
So how does this tie into your definition? And I think Bruce Springsteen, uh, who you cite on this, how does this tie in with your the idea of post-authenticity, or that we live in a post-authentic era? Is that not what the quote is?
Yeah, you know which came first, the chicken, the egg, Bob Dylan or Bruce? And the answer is Bob. Bob preceded all modern music. I mean, he I would call him a forefather of popular music. And Bob begat many, many pieces of our culture, up to and including the Boss. Bruce would be nothing. There wouldn't be Bruce. There wouldn't be a lot of stuff without Bob Dylan. So if Bruce Springsteen in the 21st century can declare that, we're out of authenticity in popular music, and thus I'm going to be able to do record long shows that sound more like the Blues Brothers with a really, really kicking band than anything else, it's because we're out of new things to do. And I'm just going to do what I know really, really well. And admittedly, it's been done before. That's why Bob's done a ridiculous Christmas album. That's why he's done, Rod Stewart crooner type situations. Because he really is an authentic voice. Albeit now a very strange, strange old man voice. He
Oh,
still is.
I think he's always been strange, and I think that what you just said is confirmation of what I said, not as artfully as you did last week, which is that a lot of people have covered Dylan songs, not as well as he has. And Dylan doesn't cover anybody else's songs. It's when he goes and does the silly Christmas album that he breaks that. Well, it's okay. He's got children and grandchildren. He can do a Christmas album if he wants. Fine, it's.
Well, and what I really appreciate is, in addition to his continued original productions, he is taking control of his legacy and is allowing stuff that's never been released to come out in glorious vinyl box sets and CDs and a variety of formats. I think he's taking a clue from Frank Zappa, who produced a whole lot of live albums and tried to get as much of his catalog mastered before he passed, so that he knew the legacy he was leaving behind, and it wasn't going to be left up to record companies. So, Bob is in control of his voice. Whether or not it's maintained its authenticity, you can't deny that it was in 1963. And still, these songs hold up as a very, very specific and unique voice.
Oh no! Again, and there's a very good line from that Chicago Tribune article I sent you that Stud Terkel in his interview. I believe it was Stud Terkel in his interview. Yeah, Stud Terkel, who was a Chicago legend, who wrote all those wonderful books about working and the war and all that, who interviewed Bob Dylan on his show in 1963, introduced him on the show by calling him a young folk poet who you might say looks like Huckleberry Finn if he lived in the 20th century. And it's kind of interesting linking Bob Dylan to Huck Finn, because he does have that kind of, you can see him with a piece of wheat in his mouth, chewing on the piece of meat, piece of wheat, that he would have picked from the backyard of growing up on the prairies of Minnesota. It's you could see that. I'm not sure, and there is a folksy, Huck Finney quality to him that is really, it's of America, but something well beyond. Again, that this inability to, or this disdain for being pigeonholed or qualified or cast or framed in any particular light by anybody else but himself. And it's not in a maybe this is the song Paul Anka wrote. Paul Anka, I believe, wrote "My Way," and it's not.
Yes,
you
he
know,
did. Yes, he
It's
did.
not. I ate it up and spit it out. It's not that. Screw you. I'm Frank Sinatra, or I'm writing for Frank Sinatra. It's just no. I just really don't care to be. I don't care to be put into any particular box by anyone. You can do what you want. I'm just not going to comment on it, and I'm going to be my own person. You know, it's a different. A different. So there's the Paul Anka, Bob Dylan, 75-year-old. Actually,
I wonder if Bob has ever covered that song. My Way.
I don't think so.
I wonder if he would.
I
All right,
Yeah.
well, hey, you've been listening to Trigger Warning's Challenging Talk Radio featuring John Ross and Chris Smith. We'll be back next week with an all-star political review. John, what's in store for next week? Will you make any predictions?
Yes, I'm going to come out and say that I was inappropriately handled by Donald Trump, because I probably was at some point, because God knows, literally or figuratively, so many of us have been.
No, I meant like, okay, yeah.
But I think it's just going to, well, it depends on which polls you believe. There are lots of supposedly outlier polls out there that say that this is a very close race, and then there are the more scientifically traditional polls. You know, the Wall Street Journal poll, the CBS News poll, the ones that tend to be affiliated with the major broadcast networks, that this is a runaway. So I do not know the range. The poll range is so vast compared to recent elections that I don't know.
Okay,
I
famous
think
75-year-olds, and do they trust the polls? Dick Cheney,
Dick Cheney doesn't care about polls.
Bernie Sanders,
Bernie Sanders benefited from being undervalued by polls, so the answer to that is no.
Martha Stewart,
Martha Stewart's Polish by birth, so she definitely trusts the polls.
Jesse Jackson.
Jesse Jackson.
Does Jesse Jackson trust the polls?
I don't. No, he did not. Although he should have. The polls were right on Obama, so maybe he does.
And finally, the last question of this show: does David Crosby trust Bob Dylan? Do you trust Bob Dylan? I wonder what Bob Dylan's trustworthiness poll numbers are, actually. Who would be higher in a trustworthiness poll? Bob Dylan or Hillary Clinton? Or Martha Stewart?
Well, Martha Stewart, I think, would be down from Hillary. Hillary Clinton doing a little better in the trustworthy category, but that has very little to do with her. I don't know how. It's very interesting. I don't know what Bob Dylan's Q factor is. I don't know what his emotional intelligence rating is.
No, if we did a trustworthiness poll, I think across 4 different songs, I've established for myself that, odds are he's going to drop me off a cliff at the end and leave me without resolution. And that's not a likable quality to a poet, but yet he's still a good one. But no, I wouldn't trust him. Would you trust him? Would you buy a used car from him?
Bob Dylan wouldn't be selling you a used car.
I don't know. Would you buy a used car from Martha Stewart?
Only if she were wearing her ankle bracelets, and I could come back and knock her over if I didn't like the car.
But you would buy a used car from Bernie Sanders.
Bernie Sanders is a used car. Yes, of course.
Would you buy a used college from Jane? I'm sorry.
No.
That's terrible.
I would not buy a used college from James Sanders.
Would you buy a used car from Dick Cheney?
I would not even buy a used pacemaker from Dick Cheney. Would you buy a used car from Mike Pence?
No. Oh, poor Mike Pence.
But
Poor
do you
Mike
know,
Pence.
I'll bet you I know what Mike Pence's sales technique is. His Glengarry Glen Ross sales line would be, with God on my side. You buy this car, you're driving God out of this lot. What will it take to get you to drive God out of this lot today?
Yeah, it's a new politics of absolutism. And we'll get to that and much more next week, including the trustworthiness of famous, how do you say 70-year-old, 70 plus?
Septuagenarians.
Huh?
Septuagenarian. Septuagenerian. Septuagenarian.
All right, we'll have a whole basket full of them next week here on Trigger Warnings.
Can they be a bucket full instead of a basketball?
Well, I don't know. Depends on how deplorable it gets. You know who else is 75? Charo. Next week,
Really?
lyrical analysis of Charo.
What? Really?
All right, folks, thanks again for tuning in to Trigger Warnings. We'll see you next time. Excellent. There we go. Let me hit stop here.